Welcome back. It's good to have you with us tonight on Prophets and Prophecy. Now, I said last week when we launched out into our new program, our new platform, that I had an epiphany where the Lord spoke to me and told me to change the format of our program and not compete with the pundits and the news anchors on current events, but to rather go back and show you what is happening, how it came to pass, and why it is happening now. Now, to do that, I had to go through a lot of documents. I went back through the Freedom of Information Act and I looked up documents that I guess are new to a lot of people. Although thanks to the government that we have, some transparency is allowed. When I was looking up some of the projects that God had put on my heart 3 years ago, when I was teaching you about the Hegelian dialectic and nanobots and fiat currency, application to prophecy, I was startled. And when I tell you I was startled, I was shocked. Now, this information is not internet hyperbole. It's documents that are registered with the U.S. government. And it is a historical event of some of the agencies that have been funded by our government in order to maintain and to keep control of the masses. Now, when they started the agency ARPA, which is the Advanced Research Project Agency, it was more or less an open door to do whatever they needed, whatever it took to stay abreast or in front of the Russians. And as ARPA went forward, it started with some projects that I mentioned last week that were amazing. In 1958 and 1960, the projects became so clandestine that they couldn't talk to the Congress about it because it was national security. They couldn't go for funding from the normal channels because then they had to meet a congressional committee. So they merged with the CIA, which was the old SS coming out of World War II. The OSS was our Secret Service division. It morphed into the Central Intelligence Agency, which merged in 1960 with ARPA. Now, when it merged, it did that to cover a multitude of projects. I told you last week that there were projects like Flame Grill and Stargate that was sponsored by the CIA. And they would take people that they felt were sensitive in the spirit world and try to get them to project themselves beyond a wall, beyond a building, beyond a barrier, even beyond an ocean. They spent billions of dollars working with what they call sensitive individuals. Some people call them psychics, some people call them prophets. They wanted them to be able to send clandestine information to our satellites beneath the ocean so that when they surfaced, they would already have the nuclear codes and their targets already implemented into their controls. And they did not trust the airways anymore because the Russians had made the boast that when they put Sputnik in space, that they controlled the wavelengths. Now, those projects, like I said, was called Stargate or Flame Grill. And they would go around the country looking for individuals that possessed this certain power to project their thoughts or to read the thoughts of others. Now, you think this is far-fetched, but I have a very dear friend of mine, he's gone now, was holding a revival in a little town in Texas. And he was calling people up and saying, you have cancer, you went to the doctor gave you this medication, throw your medicine away, God just healed you. Or somebody with a blinded eye, and he would pray for them and they would see. Well, believe it or not, this caught the attention of the government. And when the revival was over, as he was packing to leave town, the black SUVs, then it was just black cars, pulled up, asked for a day or two of his time, and it wasn't really a request. They took him by the elbows and they escorted him to the car, took him to a building that was nondescript, and they said, "We're here to test your ability to project your thoughts." Now, this is not hyperbole. I sat as the man told me this and went through it step by step with him 50 years ago. He said they would hold up cards like a star or a moon or a horse or a cat or a building. And the guy in the other room was holding up a card, and they would ask my friend, "Which one of these cards is he holding up?" And for 3 days, they went through every test they could give him. Finally, they said, "We don't know how you're doing what you're doing, but evidently you have not one psychic bone in your body." He said, "I could have told you that." He said, "What I get from God, and I get it to share with the people and to help the people of God." He said the fivefold ministry that they were given: apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers for the perfecting of the saints. They said, "Well, we have a program going. You cannot speak about this for at least a decade. We will be monitoring your crusades. We'll know wherever you go. We'll know whatever you do and whoever you meet with." I thought of that when I was reading the Freedom of Information Act. They spent billions trying to get someone who could project themselves into another realm, and they actually paid millions of dollars to try to get spiritual psychics to assassinate the enemy in another country through mental powers. It wasn't that they didn't believe the people. It wasn't that they didn't believe the powers. They did just the opposite. They were totally in belief that there was a way to breach the barriers that we know as humanity. But they wanted to be in control of it. Now, at this point last week, I told you that as they were spending billions of dollars on Stargate and Flame Grill, going all over the world looking for psychics, prophets, sensitive individuals, mediums, that they turned to warlocks and they turned to witches. Reminds me of people in foreign countries when they ask the preacher to pray for them and they're not healed, then they go to the warlock and they ask him to cast a spell, to let a healing spell come on them. They go to satanic worshipers and they go to satanic priests. Well, our country did just the same thing. They could not figure out how to control the psychics, so they went to the warlocks. And they did have some success. They did find a way to project thoughts, and they had some success on assassinating foreign enemies with mental control. Well, hang on. You know, the Bible speaks of satanic beings and satanic priests, and the priest of Jezebel, the priest in Egypt, that were false priests and worshiped Satan. So they are real. And the government was trying to figure out a way to do it. Then, as most governments do, they went to a bigger and better way. And in 1960, they had projects where they hardwired individuals' brains into interfacing with computers. They would drill a hole in your brain. They would screw in what looked like a spark plug and put on a metal hat, hook those wires into an interface and into a computer, and with mental energy only, they would control machinery. Now, this is where we left off. So we're going to pick it up from here and go forward. In 1964, they decided that the reason that they were having shortfalls and they were not being successful with the mental adaptation of the human mind was because the individuals did not have enough awareness of the spirit world. So they developed a drug called LSD, and they started passing it out at rock concerts to individuals they were testing, and they even took it to some of the major colleges in California and in Harvard. And they started giving the students there LSD so that they would be more aware of their surroundings. Now, we call it the age of Aquarius. To them, it was the age of LSD, the hallucinogen. From there, they gave it out at rock concerts. And here's what they found. They found out if they passed it out at rock concerts that certain tempos from the music would bring an awareness to those who had taken the drug that was far above anything they could achieve in a closed room or a bunker. And they began testing them. Now, I'm not going to tell you that this is where some of the stories come from about people being kidnapped by illegal aliens. All I know is that several of the people that they were testing at these rock concerts had strange memories, and they had strange thoughts, and they could not describe an absence or a memory lapse that they had. Now, all of this is in your Freedom of Information Act. In fact, the gentleman that was working with the CIA decided that he was going to expose the LSD thing. And in New York City, he took a plunge from an upper story window to his death. His son, when interviewed, and I read the entire interview, said that he was sure the CIA had thrown him out the window rather than be exposed for creating hallucinogens in order to control the mind of the masses. From that same agency, they came up with ecstasy. Now, we hear of ecstasy a lot in the parties that teenagers are having and the millennials are having, and roofies that they're having, ketamine. All of these drugs were developed by the CIA trying to get humanity to go beyond the normal thoughts of mankind and have a special awareness so they could learn how to control it. Well, all was going well. Except in 1965, Dr. Gray Walter demonstrated how he could capture brain waves without an invasive surgical procedure. You see, people were dying from the surgeries. It was very, very harmful to drill holes in people's heads and screw spark plugs in them. So he found a way, he said, that he could capture that mental energy without an invasive action. So then they started with the diodes, and they started with the pads, and they started putting chips on your skin and then hooking the wires from that to a computer, and it was called brain-computer interfacing. As the program went forward and they continued to experiment, they began to realize that if they were going to do this properly, they had to have more backing, more money, and more cooperation. So they went to a university, UCLA, in 1971 with a Dr. Jacob J. Vidal. And they started working with the XDS Sigma 7 project. And this project was interfacing the human brain with computers in order to give demands to not only other computers or other pieces of equipment, but to other individuals. Now, they had a program. And like I said, this is more fiction and stranger than fiction. I'm saying it was more fiction because people won't believe it, but it was stranger than fiction. And sometimes truth can be stranger than fiction. We learned that in this project, they started taking genomes from humans and putting them in other animals. Now, we'll get into this when we get into transhumanism, and we'll get into this when we get into cloning. But right now, I want you to see what they were doing. They were trying to take a non-human animal, a mammal, warm-blooded animal, who had a neurological system and brain response similar to ours, and try to transport information from these minds that they had given drugs to and that they had wired to computers to, and give commands to these other mammals that they could understand and obey. Well, this led to a project called the Human Mice Program. Now, they found that certain breeds of mice had more genomes that were parallel to humans than any other available mammal at that time. Now, later they went to primates, but they started with mice. And here's what they did. They did not want just to collect the memory and the energy from the brain. They wanted to create memory. They wanted to send energy back into the brain. They wanted to stimulate the brain with these computers they had developed. So they took a handful of mice. They took one from the group, and they taught him how to push a button, hit a lever, and food would come down. They didn't teach the other 9 this, just one. And as they began the experiment, they treated all of them to the same invasive mental awareness that the one had. So now you've got 10 mice that have been treated by these scientists, and they have changed and altered their neurological stance and their brain output to try to put memory back in the brain, not just take energy from it. So they took the 9 and they put them in different cages. They took the one and they put him in a cage by himself. And they didn't feed them for 3 days. So now you have some very hungry mice. Now they're totally separated from each other. There's no interaction. There's walls between all 9 of the mice. They took the one that they had trained and they put him in the cage that had the buttons and the levers. And in just a matter of moments, he had hit the button and pushed the lever and he was eating. And then something unexplainable happened. With no contact, with no prior education, without knowing what they were doing, the other 9 went through the same ritual, hit the button, pushed the lever, and they were all eating. The one that had had an awareness enhancement was transmitting to the other mice what to do in order to eat. Now, I know this sounds crazy, but our military spent billions of dollars to figure out how that one mouse, totally apart and separated from the other 9, could transmit to them a knowledge that they had not been taught to do a procedure they knew nothing about in order to feed themselves. And that, my friend, opened Pandora's box. That little program in UCLA that was called the XDS Sigma 7 program started our government, and believe it or not, the governments of the world, down a path that will one day lead to the abomination of desolation. Because they were figuring out how they could control the minds of the masses through a computer, teleprompters, satellites, and procedures. Now, in 1973, there was a project called Close Coupled Man-Machine Systems. And DARPA gave it this code name, Biocybernetics. Sound familiar? Well, today we call it artificial intelligence. We'll get into that a little later. But I will tell you this. Your bank accounts, your GPS, your work ethics, your entire medical history, your marriage, your children, your genetics, your DNA, everything about you in the last 15 years have been entered into computers that are being manned by artificial intelligence. And you are controlled, believe it or not, by the same. Now, we'll pick this up in the next broadcast, but I want to throw a nugget at you to make sure that we're on the same page. I was on the phone today. Now, this is not something I heard, not something I read. It's not something that came to me via a friend who had a friend who had a friend. I was talking to one of the officials at one of our alphabet companies. And I told him what I was getting into. I told him what I was bringing to the church attention, what I was bringing to my broadcast. That BCI was brain-computer interfaced and how they were controlling the masses. And I promise you, out of the clear, I had a thought, and I knew I had to ask a question. I said, we hear a lot about the vapor trails at high altitude. And we see jets flying crisscross grids. And if you look at Monkey Works, you can find that sometimes. There'll be a grid, they'll fly in a certain area. And when you find that grid, when you look at it from the satellite, you see vapor trails behind each of those planes. I said, is that doing anything to maybe spread sickness or change attitudes, or are they really poisoning the air, or what's going on? He indicated that I couldn't use his name, but I could tell you what he knows for a fact. Through the brain-computer interface and control of the masses, they've developed drugs like LSD, like ketamine, like ecstasy, like crack cocaine, all coming from the laboratories of DARPA, funded by the CIA, released on the American people to change our mental awareness. And the drugs being released by some of the aircraft flying over our country can either make you very, very mellow, or they can make you very, very angry, depending on what they're doing that day in that area. I would not be telling you this if I did not know for a fact. This man is a great Christian, very active in the work of God, very active in our government. And gave me his word this was true. DARPA has been working to control the masses for decades. The government has been working to control the masses for decades. Now they're not only doing it with computers, they're doing it with orally dispensed drugs, dispensed in our air and inhaled in your lungs. I find it very odd, and I'm just going to throw this in, that some of the major problems facing America right now are particles that you are inhaling in your lungs. And the masses are being controlled. So we'll get back to this. Now, in dealing with this type of information, those of you that know me, please validate to others that you know me, because truth is stranger than fiction. And as we get deeper in this, when we get into transhumanism, whenever we get into singularity, whenever we get into the cloning process, whenever we get into the super soldiers, you're going to know, and you're going to have to believe you can trust me. But I've got documentation. In another program, I'll be showing you what some of the microscopic computer parts look like. So small you can put 1 million of them on the head of a pin. And that one by itself is 20 times smaller than a blood cell and able to penetrate the blood-brain barrier. Well, we need to be moving on. Those of you that follow our broadcast, please show it to others. Please share it. Go to YouTube, hit subscribe, hit notify. The subscription will give us a little bit more clout in how we air our program. We're looking for some help now. We're looking for some producers now. We're looking for some equipment now. This is very primitive. I appreciate you for sticking with us through the hard times. Our broadcast will get better. We need your help. We need you to share it. We need you to talk about it. You can do this with total confidence that every word I give you is true. And we need your financial help. We haven't asked much for that. But times are getting a little tougher. Equipment is getting a little more expensive. And to hire people that can take our broadcast to the next level, we're going to have to do a little better financially than we're doing now. You'll see at the bottom of the screen, you can go to jphim.org and go to PayPal and donate. I would appreciate it if you'd do a monthly donation, even if it wasn't but $20 a month, $50 a month. That way we would know what we can depend on and how we can budget for the equipment and for the personnel we need to bring more truth to you. We love you. We appreciate each and every one of you that have taken it upon yourself to pray for us, to hold us up, and support us. We're depending on you to help us tell how, when, and where prophecy will be fulfilled in your life. We love you. We appreciate you. May God bless you, and may God bless America.